Leonie, I'm sorry to interrupt you there, Leonie Miller in Brisbane. We've got to leave it there. We're going to cross live now to Melbourne, where the Labor MP for Wills, Kelvin Thomson, is speaking to the media.
The Electoral Commission information appearing in this morning's newspapers, I have the strongest two-party preferred vote of any Labor candidate in Australia. Of course, the late counting and preference distributions can influence the final outcome, but I'm really proud to have such a strong result, and I am determined to represent the people of Wills throughout the next Parliament to the best of my ability and to be a strong advocate for their views. I will not be a candidate for the Labor front bench. I was a shadow minister in opposition for the 10 years prior to 2007. I have been there and done that. In my experience, being an opposition front bencher means that you are not permitted to speak on areas outside your portfolio, and indeed in relation to the things that you do say, you are required to seek approval from the office of the Leader of the Opposition. I think that in a world that has such big challenges, and in Australia that has such big challenges, that is simply too limiting for me. We live in a world which is confronted by perhaps irreparable damage caused by rapid population growth, climate change, rainforest habitat destruction and other habitat destruction, war, poverty, terrorism. And Australia is not immune from these challenges. Our unique and beautiful birds and plants and animals are threatened with extinction. Our young people find it difficult to afford a house and they face job insecurity, while many pensioners and retirees struggle with cost of living pressures through things like rising electricity, gas and water bills and increasing council rates. So I wish to be an advocate for these issues. Anyone who thinks that my returning to the backbench and not contesting the front bench is a sign that I wish to lead the quiet life and slip out the back door, they are very much mistaken. On the contrary, this is a necessary precondition for my being able to engage in a national debate about the issues that really matter, both globally and here in Australia. I want to say a few words about Labor's future. We did not lose the election because of our economic management, which was very good. We have low interest rates, low inflation, low unemployment, a AAA credit rating, low public sector debt. What was poor was our political management, and it is this that cost us the election. This goes to both leadership and to policy. On the question of leadership, over the years we have seen a steady and relentless drift of political power away from the electorate, away from members of political parties, away from members of parliament, away from ministers and shadow ministers towards party leaders. This is fundamentally undemocratic, and it is a recipe for disaster. When party leaders are filling the airwaves, coming out 24/7, what it means is that ordinary Labor Party members and ordinary members of the electorate don't get a say. I and my fellow MPs are readily accessible. People can come and see me anytime. They do not have the same access to Prime Ministers and Premiers. So my advice to the incoming Leader of the Opposition is first, do less. Don't try and swamp the airwaves. Don't fall for the 24/7 media cycle. Don't dominate the airwaves at the expense of ministers and shadow ministers, members of parliament and other voices. Take the time to get policies right. We don't need to do more, we don't need to announce more. What we do need to do is get the things that we have announced right. Secondly, I believe that we need to return power to the Parliamentary Labor Party by having decisions and proposals come to the Parliamentary Labor Party and be left on the table there for comment and consideration and consultation. We have regularly seen botched policy announcements which were the consequence of too few people being involved in the decision making. On the floor of the Victorian Parliament, close to here, is an expression where no council is, the people fail, but in the multitude of councillors there is wisdom. So I believe that proposals ought to come to the caucus and be left there so that ordinary members of Parliament and members of the public can have a say in the decision making, rather than either have decisions being made without reference to the caucus at all, or being presented as a fait accompli with no proper opportunity for consultation and discussion. And finally, I want to say something about policy. We need to have policies which are in touch with what the voters think. I am all in favour of Labor being a middle-of-the-road party. I'm happy to be middle of the road. But many of my colleagues seem to think that being middle of the road amounts to doing what big business wants. I think that being middle of the road is doing what voters want. And if we did what voters want in areas like population growth, migration, planning, foreign ownership and live animal exports, we would be in a far better place today. Thank you.
Can I just ask, you said botched policy announcements were part of the previous parliament. What policies in particular are you talking about?
Well, there were quite a number of them, but classics were the announcement of the East Timor solution, which had not been checked off on by the East Timorese themselves, the announcement of the Malaysia solution, which didn't withstand the scrutiny of the High Court, media reform, where we couldn't get the support of the independents to get this through the parliament, superannuation. During the last budget we floated changes to superannuation and simply managed to scare people. So others will be aware of these things. There were a litany of policy areas where we should have done better and would have done better had they been a matter of discussion by the Parliamentary Labor Party and indeed around the electorate more broadly, rather than being announced without that kind of scrutiny.
Was that an issue during the campaign as well, where Kevin Rudd announced things like a big company tax break in the Northern Territory?
Yes. As far as I can tell, well, that issue had certainly never been to the Parliamentary Labor Party, and as far as I could tell, it wasn't even the subject of consultation with ministers, so absolutely.
How would you describe Rudd's campaign?
Well, you want to be careful about getting into the campaign analysis and thinking that if only we had run a better campaign, we would have got a different result. I think that there's too much focus on tactics and strategy and not enough on getting the policy right and handling the issues well. I do think that the campaign could have been run better. I think that others in the Labor Party have a similar view to that. But I don't think we should be saying if only we had run a better campaign, we'd have got a better outcome.
Should Kevin Rudd go completely from Parliament and from the ALP?
Well, not from the ALP. In terms of his parliamentary career, that's a matter for him. He's had a long and distinguished parliamentary career, and I think it's up to him to choose when and how he completes it.
Do you think that obviously disunity has been a feature of Labor over the last few years, and I'd like to get your thoughts on that, but do you think that your plan here risks putting out the perception that there's more disunity if more people are coming at different ideas and shouting about different things rather than the leader?
No, I think it would be helpful if we had genuine debate. I think that would be good for the country and good for the Labor Party. I agree that disunity has been a problem. We've had disunity in spades, but that disunity has been around personalities, and I think that has been very destructive. And I would be wary of people saying that disunity is the only problem, and provided that we unite behind the next leader and everybody just falls into lockstep behind the next leader, that will solve all our problems. It is my view that we will get better outcomes if we are more democratic, that if there is more opportunity for consultation, more opportunity for the parliamentarians to have their say, for the ordinary Labor Party members to have their say. at the moment, the Labor Party branches and the policy committees are essentially moribund, and the state and federal conference and the caucus have acted as a rubber stamp. I think those things need to change, and we need to have leadership which consults with the Labor Party members of Parliament and the membership, and breathes life into and resuscitates the branches and the policy committees and the state and national conferences.
Who would you like to see as the next leader of the party?
Well, you want to get me focused on leadership, and I've just suggested to you that it is the obsessive focus on leadership which has been destructive and damaging for us. I think it is unfortunate that in Australia we have had this drift of political power away from ordinary people and away from people involved in political parties towards leadership, and making it all about leadership. So given that I think that, I'm not going to express a view about who the leader ought to be. It's a question for the Parliamentary Labor Party, but whoever the leader is in future, we need to act to return power to the members of the Parliamentary Labor Party and to people around the electorate more generally. At the moment, you've got a situation where people out here can't expect to get access to prime ministers and leaders of the opposition and premiers and so on. That doesn't happen. They can get access to ordinary MPs, and that would vastly improve our political process if there was more of that happening.
Just again, in terms of the campaign, if I can ask you, do you think Kevin Rudd saved seats that Julia Gillard might have lost?
Well, I think this is in the realm of the hypothetical. My impression is that we had a better result than we were tracking for a couple of months ago. But as I say, if we think it's all about the campaign and all about who the leader is, we are making a mistake. It is about getting the policies right and responding appropriately to the issues as they arise.
You said some of the leadership turmoil was about personalities before. Can you just explain what you mean by that? The personalities of the leaders and how they clash, or can you explain?
Well, clearly there was a contest between Julia Gillard and Kevin Rudd as to who should be leader, and when after Kevin Rudd was deposed as leader, he sought to return to being the leader, and there were personality differences between people who were supporting Julia Gillard and people who were supporting the return of Kevin Rudd. So those personality clashes were on show, and people made statements about Kevin Rudd, both in favour of him and against him throughout the entire period.
And some of those comments against him, I mean, Labor MPs have described him as a white anta and a psychopath. How would you describe Kevin Rudd?
Look, I think that Kevin Rudd did a great deal of good in terms of the policies that he stood for and introduced, and he was leader during the time that Australia came through the global financial crisis in incredibly good shape. We are the envy of the world in terms of where we are with employment and inflation and interest rates and the like. It is quite clear that he had a personality style which tended to bring all the decision making into himself, and that was not sufficiently consultative. I think that is widely acknowledged and was definitely problematic. But again, I encourage people not to think that this is all about the search for a messiah. If we say, if only we have a different leader, then everything will be all right, that is completely wrong. And it's a flaw in politics generally in Australia. It's not simply about the Labor Party being obsessed with leadership. All those polls that come out constantly say who is the preferred leader, and often media and commentators ask more questions about that than they do about the standing of the political parties or how they are seen to tackle issues like education and health and environment and the like. So we need less focus on leadership, more focus on policy and issues.
Can I ask you about Paul Howe as a possible replacement for Carr if he decided to step down?
Well, again, a very, very hypothetical question. Last time I looked, Bob Carr was a New South Wales senator doing important work, so I don't think I'll respond to that.
Can I just ask you about how long you think it would take Labor to pick itself up and put itself as a viable alternative again? Do you think it'll take a long time? Do you think it can be in the next term?
There are different political histories. I've seen a lot of oppositions, and some I felt when I got into the federal parliament in 1996 that we were in good working order and could make a quick comeback. I was wrong about that. It took us 11 years. Conversely, when I left the Victorian Parliament in 1992, I thought we were in pretty poor shape and that it would take us forever to get back. And in fact, Steve Bracks was back there in 1999. So I think it is very difficult to predict and see around corners. As I indicated earlier, I think there is a problem in terms of the centralisation of decision making with the leadership and a lack of democratic say for members of parliament, for policy committees, for party branches, for state and federal conferences, and the sooner we return power to these areas and give ordinary people a say in the decisions that impact on their lives, the quicker we will regain the confidence of the community, and the quicker we will return to office.
Was there enough consultation on the PNG, so-called PNG solution, and can you just give us your thoughts on how that came about and went about?
Well, a lot of these things I don't know where the consultation occurred, and that's part of the problem, isn't it? That the consultation was not widespread, so some matters have gone to Cabinet and some have gone to the full ministry and all that sort of thing, but others seem to have been announced without having even been discussed at that level. So it's difficult to know what the arrangements were concerning particular decisions. What I'm saying is decisions ought to go to the Parliamentary Labor Party, and they shouldn't just be run through at that meeting and presented as a fait accompli, because that's been a thing that has happened a lot as well. We've had some proposals which will go to caucus committees, and that's a good process, but the expectation is that they will be decided on the spot without the members of the caucus committee being able to think about them and consult with colleagues or members of their electorate or interest groups, people who have an interest in the issue. So I am saying there needs to be more widespread consultation. Okay.
Thank you very much.
The Labor MP for Wills, Kelvin Thomson there, providing another post-mortem in the growing list of post-mortems into the election result for the ALP. He's the outgoing Parliamentary Secretary for Schools. He's just announced that he won't be putting himself forward to sit on the opposition front bench. He's blamed Labor's election loss on poor political management, and he's advised the party's new leader, still to be determined, not to try and swamp the 24-hour news cycle, saying there's been far too much focus on leadership within the party.